We are in Romans chapter 2, and verse 17, Romans 2, 17 through 29. And, Romans may be the most complete book in the Bible as far as what it teaches. It's very, very thorough. Paul is very, very thorough in what he's teaching in the book of Romans. It shows us why we need to be saved. That's important because sometimes we tell people that need to be saved. Well, saved from what? It tells us why we need to be saved, how to be saved. It tells us how to overcome the power of sin. That's a good one, all right? So if we're saved, to learn how to be saved and overcome the power of sin, how to walk in the power of the Spirit, power of the Holy Spirit, and how to handle all kinds of human relationships. That's a big one, isn't it? All kinds of human relationships. Tells us how to deal with the other human beings. Sometimes you get up in the morning, look out the window and say, boy, it looks very people-y out there today. Maybe you just ought to go back to bed, But tells us how to handle human relationships. And in the first 3 chapters, Paul proves that every segment of the human race must be saved. Whether you're Jew, Gentile, every segment of the human race must be saved, and that we must be saved from sin, and that we all must have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ to be saved. Now, all of the people, when you think about the people he's talking to here, he's talking to his kinsmen, he's talking to Jews. Of all people, you'd think that the Jews ought to know that. You'd think they ought to know that. But they did what many people do today. These Jews that he was talking about, the moral Jews he was talking to, they had an outward form of religion, but never turned their hearts over to Jesus. And there are a lot of people like that today. They've got an outward form of religion. You see a lot of religiosity, superficial kind of religiosity, and you see a lot of churchianity. So we're kind of talking about tonight between church membership and kingdom membership tonight, okay? So there's a lot of that kind of churchianity in the world today. There are a lot of people that have that outward form of religion, but they've never turned never turned their hearts over to Jesus. They've never been saved. And one of the greatest dangers today is that you can be a church member and you can be baptized. Listen, you can own a Bible. You can even you can tithe, and please do. You can tithe. You can even teach a Sunday school class. You can even teach a Sunday school class and still not be saved. You know that you can do all of these churchy things and still not be saved. Salvation must be of the heart. And when it's of the heart, then it will show up on the outside. The fact that you're a Christian, the fact you're a believer, that will show up. If it's of the heart, it will show up, and people will see that. They'll see that. You can dress up the outside, and still not have it right on the inside. So that's dangerous. You can be all of those things and still not be saved. Well, look in, if you would, in beginning in verse number 17. He's been talking, and then he says, Indeed, you are called a Jew, and rest on the law, and make your boast in God. Well, it's good to be able to read the Bible again. I mean, it's been such a struggle. Indeed, you're called a Jew, and rest on the law, and make your boast, your boast in God. Now, Jew, that was an honorable title. That was an honorable title. It comes from Judah. It comes from the name Judah. I have a grandson named Judah, and it means praise of God. Praise of God. So he said, you're called a Jew. You know, Christian, the term Christian began as a derisive term. It's only used 3 times in the Bible. We use it all the time, but it's only found 3 times in the Bible. But they first called them Christians at Antioch, and they were really making fun of them. It was really a term of derision, but it's a wonderful title. I can't think of anything I'd rather be called than be called a Christian. Be called a Christian. But Christianity must be of the heart. It's not of the head. It's not of the outward, of dressing up the outward appearance. It's not of rituals and religious kinds of things. No, it's a heart. It comes from the heart. It's a heart belief. A heart belief. So, you know, these people, these Jews were bragging that they knew God, but they didn't know God. They knew who God was, and they knew about God, but they didn't know God. Paul, even years after he was saved, said that I may know him in the power of his resurrection. That I may know him in the power of his resurrection. A real Christian actually does know God. A real Christian actually does know God and desires to know him in even a greater way. Verse 18, and know this, or know his will, and approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law. So notice Paul says, indeed you're called a Jew, and rest on the law, and make your boast in God, and know his will, and approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law. You know, knowing God's will and doing God's will are 2 different things. Okay? Knowing God's will and doing God's will. It's one thing to know God's will. That's important. It's a big thing to know God's will. But then what are you going to do about it? You're going to do God's will. To know God's will and to do God's will. Jesus, Paul is talking about to these Jews that they had high standards, but they didn't always live up to them. And I know many Christians, you know, who could talk a good talk, you know, but we need to be able to walk a good walk. All right? You know, we used to say, you know, I don't smoke and I don't cuss and I don't go with the girls that do, right? So, but we're not Christians because of what we do or because of what we don't do. We're not Christians because of what we do and what we don't do. We're Christians through Christ. And then because we're Christians, we're to love like Christ. We're to walk with God, and Jesus to be our example in everything that we do. So it will affect the way that we live and what we do because we're Christians. Okay? We don't set these high standards and say these high standards will make me a Christian. We have high standards because we are Christians. Because we have been saved. He's changed our lives. So the inward walk will take care of the outward walk. Perhaps, you know, the greatest single problem in Christianity or the church today is profession without possession. People profess something that they do not possess. People profess salvation but do not possess it. And that's a great problem in Christianity and the church today. Look in verse 19 and verse 20. He said, and are confident that you yourselves are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness. He said, well, you know, you think and you believe that you're guiding others. An instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, having the form of knowledge and the truth of the law. Well, you know, they look down on other people. They said, you bragging God and you boast in the Lord and you got all these standards, but no, you're not all of that. You're looking down your noses at other people. You know, I always have to remember, and all of us Christians, we have to remember, you know, but for the grace of God. We are what we are by the grace of God. We've been saved by the grace of God. We've been redeemed by the grace of God. We grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. So anything about me that is good is the grace of God. I'm a sinner saved by the grace of God, so anything about me that comes out good, it's not me, it's the grace of God. It's the grace of God in our lives. Now, go on and continue in verse 21 and 22. You, therefore, who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You're teaching others. Are you teaching yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? Well, hypocrisy. He's talking about hypocrisy. And he accuses them of 3 sins. He accused them of 3 sins. One, stealing. Actually, some of these people were notorious for stealing. Some of these moral Jews were notorious for stealing. Some were so treacherous, they'd been expelled from Rome. Did you know that some of the most corrupt people in the world go to church every Sunday? Some of the most corrupt people all over this world go to church every Sunday? Sure, and then they're dishonest on money. Adultery, stealing, adultery. They had made marriage laws. They had compromised on marriage laws and made marriage laws so liberal where they were getting divorced for just about any reason. Just about any reason. Keep Romans 2 marked and turn back to John chapter 8, the Gospel of John chapter 8 for just a moment. And let me read verses 1 through 11. John 8, 1 through 11. But Jesus went out to the Mount of Olives. Now early in the morning he came again to the temple. And all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. Let him throw the first stone at her. And he stooped down and wrote again on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went one by one, beginning the oldest, even to the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up, he saw no one but the woman. He said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. And they all ran off. You know why? Because they were all guilty. They were accusing her of the same thing they were guilty of. They were accusing her of the same thing they were guilty of. That they had made the laws so liberal that they could just do about whatever they wanted to. And then idolatry, accuse them of idolatry. They performed the temples. They were there in the temples and were where idols were worshipped. Sure, and they were accusing others of things they were guilty of themselves. So he picked stealing, adultery, and idolatry, but he could have picked any number of